morning, everyone, and a warm welcome from Hungary on behalf of KÖVET Association at the last third event of the carbon footprint calculation webinar series. Today's event is titled Low Carbon Strategy, and we will just take a look at the agenda for today. On the next slide, please. So we will start with a brief summary of the first two webinars, and then today's topics will be action plan, science-based target as well, carbon neutrality, long-term strategy, vulnerability, and new methodology. Low carbon transition. Then we again prepared some Mentimeter questions for you, and you can ask your questions in the chat box basically throughout the presentation. So just please feel free, like last time, because we experienced that participants were quite shy the first webinar, but the last time we had quite a few questions. So again, use the chat box for this. The webinar again is recorded for informational and training purposes, and we will send you the presentation slides after the event. Thank you. Okay, so who is going to present today? We will see in the next slide. I'm just going to introduce them briefly. We've got Rebecca Hughes-Khan on behalf of the Worldwide Fund from South Africa. Thank you, Rebecca, for being with us from Cape Town. She is an engagement and target analyst at the Worldwide Fund in South Africa. Got Gerard Wogu from the Association Bilan Carbone from Paris. She is the methodology officer, and we've got Katalin Hernen on behalf of KÖVET Association, the executive director. And we will just have the brief summary of the first two webinars.
Yes, thank you, Zsaritu. My name is Katalin Herner, as my colleague introduced me, and we are very glad that you attend to the webinar. And as Katinka told you, this is the third webinar. We thought it could be a good idea to give you an overview about the topic. And on the first webinar, we talked about a little bit about the climate change, and we had a very professional lady from the IPCC, Professor Diana Ürgeforschatz, who introduced us not only about the IPCC but the global budget and the importance of the climate mitigation as well. We were also talking about the science-based target a little bit, but today that will be much deeper about this topic with Rebecca. We were talking about the carbon footprint of organization and what is mandatory in Europe, what is the law, and what is the expectation in the law in Europe. Also, the Green Deal we had to already talk about, and we also mention it today, and carbon taxing. And we had some questions to you through the Mentimeter, the results you also received. And I again say that if you couldn't attend to webinar, the first or the second webinar, we can send you the PPT slides and the Mentimeter results as well. So this was the first webinar, and then the second webinar last week. Please, the next slide. Yeah, thank you. We were talking about the carbon reporting, the carbon disclosure of project, and also mentioned some ISO standards like the 1464 and the 1467, which are kind of framework for carbon footprint and carbon calculation. And also Bilan Carbone and the methodology and as a tool was presented by Michael Hero. And we had the questions also in the Mentimeter. The results had been sent out to you and to the participants from last time, but we will do it again, and you will get all the free webinars and the Mentimeter results after this webinar. So this was just a very brief summary of the webinar, the previous webinars, and then now let's see the topics of today.
Thank you, Katinka. I hope you can hear me. Is it good? Yes. So the GHG accounting was to determine a CFO is a two-step process, and maybe I can open my camera, which will be better. Sorry. And we see in the first part that it was the calculation of GHG emissions, and now we'll see how to define a GHG reduction actions, because we couldn't start talking about low carbon strategy without making a focus on the GHG reduction action, which will be the first step to do that. So to define and implement an action plan, we see that we need to account for your emission and make it possible to identify the sources for which the activity may have room to maneuver in order to reduce its emissions. And the first step is to understand what is a GHG emission reduction action. It's not as easy as it seems, because you have indeed to be careful about the support of your top management. So you have to take into account all the internal and external actions, and to have a correct definition of indicators and many other things which will be and improve the efficiency and the result of your actions. You can have quick wins action. You can, in fact, you have three kinds. We can classify action in three kinds of category. And the first one could be the quick wins actions, which is short-term actions. And the second one is the midterm actions. And finally, we have the strategic actions. There is also a difference between each kind of actions. You have in the quick wins actions, the more easy actions to implement, and also some actions which are related to raising awareness of your colleagues and your organizations, and these are the first kind of action in which you can see the results quickly. That's why it was a short-term action, and you can implement it from in the first step until 1 year. You can have some results. And for the second kind of actions, which are priority actions and also high potential actions, that's kind of actions require investments and target the most important GHG emission resources. So the results will be more important, but you need to implement it during a long term. That's why it is the midterm actions. And finally, we have the strategic actions, which is a long-term actions, because you need to reconsider overall the business model of your organizations. So the second step is to create the necessary space for your action plan, and you have to organize the management of your action plan, from animating a technical committee and define also criteria for prioritizing actions and assess the first results. You have also some tools to manage and to define actions, like you have tools for the calculations part. And an action plan, finally, is a set of actions aiming for reducing the GHG emissions produced directly or indirectly. And it will be based on the GHG inventory and address the significant sources of GHG. So the action plan should be implemented and followed. And that's why you have, after that, some kind of strategy to go deeper and being able to go through a low carbon transitions. So I think I can also, you can also have a question on how to build an action. So I just mentioned that there's some methodology, maybe not at international standards, but you can find at national level or with the more advanced or mature country organizations in the carbon transition strategy, and also tool to define how to build an action. And it will be a continuity between the action building and its implementation. To ensure this continuity, it's necessary to engage sorry, a co-construction approach with interested parties, and you have to identify a lot of possible action first, and do not limit yourself to those you think that are doable. And after that, you have to shape the action plan since the beginning of the GNT inventory. Of course, you have to think about that. I will calculate my carbon footprint of my organization with the aim of objective of reducing the action, my GHG emissions, and for that, I need absolutely to implement action plan to reduce it. So at each step, for the calculation of the data, the collecting of the data, the calculating phase, the restitution of the results, you have to think of the action plan elaborations with your colleagues, with the management, and also with the external stakeholders to involve them and to pursue the objective of your reductions. So now it's the first step to have in mind, because later we can talk about avoided emissions and carbon neutrality. So I think Katinka will give you some tips about that. And before also starting defining a wider methodology, like it will be the kind with the SBT. So I will give the floor to Rebecca to give you more in detail with the SBT methodology.
Thank you so much, and a big thank you to the organizers for this opportunity. Looking forward to virtually present and engage with you all. As previously introduced, my name is Rebecca. I'm based at WWF in Cape Town, but I work predominantly as an engagement and target analyst for the Science Based Targets Initiative internationally. So today I'll just be focusing on a broad overview and introduction of the Science Based Targets Initiative, as well as the concept of science-based target setting. And it flows nicely into the previous discussion around an action plan that I'll touch on in the upcoming slides. So the Science-Based Targets Initiative is an unprecedented collaboration between four leading global NGOs, WWF, where I'm based, CDP, United Nations Global Compact, and the World Resources Institute. We're also in collaboration with We Mean Business Coalition, and we focus on implementing the Paris Agreement objectives for the relevancy of corporates. So our vision is that science-based targets setting, focusing on greenhouse gas emission reductions, will become standard business practice, and corporations will play a key role in the transition to a zero carbon economy. Next slide, please. So the concept of science-based targets is very simply a corporate greenhouse gas emission reduction target that specifies how quickly and by how much a company needs to reduce their emissions to align with the latest climate science. So to align with the goals set out within the Paris Agreement. So aiming for a 1.5 degree future where we have global warming of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures. That's our ultimate goal, but also understanding that the well below 2°C goal is also in line with the latest climate science. So we translate the goals and outputs of the Paris Agreement to outputs that are relevant for companies. So long-term mitigation goals for the global economy are translated into targets that cover relevant emissions that companies emit within their value chain at a smaller scale, so at a company scale. And we translate a long-term temperature goal into a shorter time frame. So we focus on midterm targets of 5 to 15 years in the future to ensure accountability and drive short-term action, and then a translation of temperature metrics to metrics that are relevant for companies. Next slide, please. So all in all, we're looking to position science-based targets to what NDCs are for countries. So to understand on this reduction trajectory, these midterm science-based targets goals will take a company to reach net zero value chain emissions within a time frame and carbon budget that are consistent with the Paris goals. Next slide, please. So since our inception in June of 2015, we are a growing movement, which you can see by the graph. As of today, we have over 980 companies globally that are part of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, with over 460 companies having approved science-based targets in place that have gone through the verification process that we offer as an initiative. Next slide, please. This graph is just a color-coded graph showing the uptake of science-based targets. So you can see we've had great uptake in the Northern Hemisphere, specifically around Japan, Europe, and the US. And we're upsurging and focusing on Southern Hemisphere economy, specifically around Latin America and Africa, to continue the upsurge and adoption of science-based targets. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of business benefits companies can see from setting science-based targets, and this is an output of a YouGov survey for a number around 150 company execs, and this was the output. So a range of business benefits ranging from gaining competitive advantage to driving innovation and technological change within a company, aligning your business to upcoming regulation within your country or region of relevance to the climate space, as well as having a positive brand reputation boost, specifically around like consumer forward-facing companies such as retail, investor confidence boosted, and savings as a result of having greenhouse gas emission reduction targets in place. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So there's a 4-step process for companies to interact and get involved with the Science-Based Targets Initiative and the platform that we call the call to action. So the first step that companies can take is submitting a commitment letter. So basically publicly stating that yes, your company sees the benefits of setting science-based targets and you'll work towards this, and this is the public commitment that you're putting forward. So companies that are interested will be profiled on our website as committed, and during the process of being between committed and submitting a target, that's the bulk of the time wherein companies use our resources and available criteria and recommendations to build out their corporate greenhouse gas reduction target to align with our best practice and criteria, and to socialize the needed decision making and inputs within the company. And then step 3, submit to the Science-Based Targets Initiative for verification. We offer a target validation service, which is a paid offering where we turn around a in-depth technical review of your targets within 30 business days, and offer feedback and recommendations. And then should your company be approved, move on to working with you to announce your target on our website and other associated communications. So all in all, once the company has committed, they've got 24 months to have approved targets in place. Often companies will decide to move straight to step 2 and develop and then submit. So the commitment step is encouraged but not compulsory. Next slide, please. So overall, the concept of science-based target setting is translating the macro scale global carbon budget, understanding what is the share of the carbon budget for your company, and given that share, how much do you need to reduce to align with where our temperature goal needs to be in the future. Next slide, please. So there's two main ways to allocate this carbon budget according to each company. The first option is the sector agnostic absolute contraction method, which generally applies to most sectors except financial institutions and oil and gas, as there's specific sector developments underway that I'll touch on in the upcoming slides. But basically the premise of this is all companies need to contract or reduce their emissions by a certain percentage per year to align with either well below 2 degrees future or a 1.5 degrees future. And then the second option is a sector-specific method, and this draws into the methodology that's been developed by the Science Based Targets Initiative called the sectoral decarbonization approach, and that has a look at available mitigation options and the specific share of the global carbon budget that a specific sector should have, and then models the reduction pathways according to this information. And this is largely on an intensity basis for homogeneous sectors. So, for example, for cement that produces per tons of cement or steel. And we also have, it covers a large part of heavy industry, so power, real estate, ICT, some transport sectors, but we have a lot of bespoke sectors that are under development that we'll touch on. Next slide, please. Great. So this is the available sector developments underway or that have just been completed. So in the transport space, we have shipping and aviation under development, with shipping looking to be completed near the end of this year, with aviation extending into Q1 of 2021. We've also got a project led by WWF. You can see the leads, organizational leads on the left-hand side, which will look into agricultural, forestry, and other land use emissions aligned with the greenhouse gas protocol build out. That's a longer-term project into 2021. There's also oil and gas sector development underway. Power generation has been recently released. Financial institution sector development is due to be released next month. Chemicals is underway, moving into next year, and the ICT sector guidance has been released this year. Next slide, please. So touching on what I've explained generally, we have a range of available resources to guide companies in science-based target setting and building out your greenhouse gas inventory and understanding how to reduce your emissions and by how much. these are the core resources that I've picked out, but we've got a broad range available on this link that I've included on our website. But the core resources of relevance for the specificities of science-based target setting is around the criteria and target validation protocol. And we also have a useful target setting manual that takes you through some broader topics that are of use to get internal buy-in and understand how to socialize and have a more granular understanding of how to approach this. And then for relevance to your value chain, we have a specific report on best practices in Scope 3 greenhouse gas management called Value Change in the Value Chain. Next slide, please. So just to touch point on this, as I understand, other associations within the call will also be talking about this, but as of last week, we've released a Net Zero Foundations paper. So we are on a long-term project to build out what science-based global standard for net zero corporate targets looks like. The initial stages are around defining what net zero means within the corporate space and guiding principles within a Net Zero Foundations paper. And this is available at the link with a blog and executive summary. And over the next approximately 12 months, we will be building out specific criteria and guidance on the granularity around net zero target setting for companies. So if you're interested, I encourage you to have a look at this link. There's opportunities to get involved either with email updates or involved in the consultative group. So I encourage you to have a look at that. I think this may be my last slide. If you just move to the closing slide, please. Great. So just wanted to extend a thank you. I understand this is a lot of information, rapid fire, but more than happy to answer any questions in the Q&A, but I encourage you to explore our website and understand the relevance of science-based target setting for your business. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Rebecca. So I'll try to.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Thank you so much.
Here. Okay.
And now we are moving on to carbon neutrality.
Okay, that's right.
Thank you. I think this science-based target is really a very interesting tool.
Should be another slide.
Yeah, this is not the right side.
Can you go back
Yeah.
one slide, please?
And I really encourage you to ask. I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions to Rebecca, how to count it and how to deal with it as a company,
Yes.
for example.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is the right one. And then we would like to tell you some words about the carbon neutrality. So under the Paris Agreement, which was signed by 195 countries, it's standing that carbon neutrality is a global goal of these countries, and the EU has committed to this carbon neutrality within the Green Deal the end of the last year. And the carbon neutrality is the goal of the European Union by 2050. Neutrality means that having a balance between the emitting carbon and absorbing carbon from the atmosphere in carbon sinks like soil, forest, oceans, or wetlands, and removing carbon from the atmosphere and then store it, which called sequestration, the carbon storage code like this. So if you have a balance between these two, then it means that you are carbon neutral. It's a neutral company, a continent, or a country, whatever. According to the estimates, the natural things, which I mentioned, the soil, forest, oceans, or the wetlands, can remove between 9.5 and 11 gigatons of CO2 from the atmosphere per year. And the annual global emissions reached 37.1 gigatons in 2017. And we know that it's getting bigger. Maybe this year it will stop a little bit, but it means that it will be bigger and bigger, and we don't have too much in the things phase. So the natural things don't contain that much. Yes. So the carbon offsetting is compensating for emissions by reducing them somewhere else. It could be in the same country, in the same continent, or even on the other side of the world, of course. It can be made by through the investment in renewable energy, energy efficiency, or other clean, low carbon technologies, or which is very often happening, or forestation. The European Union's emissions trading system, which you are, I'm sure you know, and we just mentioned it last time, the ETS system is an example for this carbon offsetting system. And yeah, it's working, it's going well. The EU goal, this carbon neutrality by 2050, has a very strong milestone in 2030, when the European Union wants to reduce the GHG emissions by 40% compared to the 1990 levels. So this is the first milestone. We have to reach this, and then we have the chance to reach the carbon neutrality by 2050. The next slide, please. Here is just an infographic about what carbon offset is meaning and why do we need it. We know it well that from the carbon cycle and from the economy means that the carbon GHG emission is just rising very rapidly, and with all the reductions, it cannot be neutralized. That's why the offsetting should be taken into consideration. And what can we do? We can the individuals can buy, for example, carbon offsets from companies that in energy development and renewable energy, they can have this on the other side. And carbon offset is, we have to mention that carbon offset is not immediate, so it occurs slowly. So this is one of the big problems with the carbon offsetting. For example, you would like to offset your carbon emission, GHG emission, but the GHG emission occurs in the past, and the offsetting part of the offsetting is in the future. So that's why it's not we think that it's not the only way. You also have to reduce your GHG emissions as far as you can, and you are able to. Next slide, please. And what does it mean, carbon neutrality of Europe, of a country or a region? So you can see that for Europe, it's a European Green Deal, as I mentioned. For the countries, I found a very interesting web page, and here you can see that which countries have a low or a very strong political goal or agreement to fulfill this requirement and to be a net zero emission target by 2050 or 2045, for example. You can see here listed the countries. I'm sorry, I only listed the European Union countries. You can see on the web page other worldwide countries who are committed to this goal. You can see here, for example, Sweden, France, the UK, Denmark, Hungary, Spain. There is an existing law for that they have to reach the carbon neutrality by 2050 or even 2045, as in Sweden. And a very strong political goal or agreement are existing in the following countries like Austria, Finland, Germany, Iceland and Ireland, Norway, Portugal, Slovakia and Switzerland, and another several countries around the world. And here I have to mention that there is, for example, one country on the world, Bhutan, who is already a carbon negative country. So they are emitting less than they are that they can, as a thing, they can on the other side. Oh, something happened. Cannot see now. And the next would be if I can have back the slide, please. Yes, thank you. You can also think about the carbon neutrality. It could be about a region. No, the previous one. It could be about a region or a town or a city. And there is existing Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, which, for example, Amsterdam and Copenhagen is part of that. They have also this very strong target to be carbon neutral. It can be also for a company, as the science-based target is also mostly about companies. This carbon neutral protocol is also a protocol, a method how a company can reach this carbon neutrality and how can it be accounted. For example, Microsoft, Sky, and Logitech also part of this carbon neutral protocol. And of course, you can also think about carbon neutrality of a family or a person. So next is that how to reach this net zero emission, even you are thinking about a company or about a family or about a country, you have the following possibilities to reach that. What is the first and the very important or the most important we think is the emission reduction. So the total emission reduction, the energy efficiency is the most important. And then the renewable energy sources, of course, instead of fossil fuels. In this moment, worldwide, is it still the nuclear energy is part of that deal? It means that until now it's not. At least it's not obvious that renewable energy sources can be enough. Nuclear energy is part of that. But with this, you can reach the carbon-free electricity and also some other very important methods or actions which you can take. For example, the carbon pricing for transport and buildings. These are mostly for countries, of course. The tree planting, carbon sinks, strengthening by forestation, restoring wetlands, for example, support electric vehicles instead of petrols and diesel vehicles, or strengthen the mobility, electromobility worldwide. International carbon offsetting, what I already mentioned, and develop technologies to remove CO2 from the air. They are very new and innovative technologies, and also technologies for storing this CO2 removed from the air. For example, depleted North Sea oil fields. There are technologies invested for that. These are the carbon neutrality possibilities for a company or for a country or even for a person. You can see here some logos for this Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance and for the Carbon Neutral Protocol, which can be reached by the companies. So thank you. This was all about carbon neutrality. I give back the floor to Joarito.
Thank you, Katinka. So now we have seen the importance to shape an action plan, the importance to follow a methodology like the science-based target ones. And you can also make a link with the overall strategy of your organizations, in fact, because it's also a mean to assess the vulnerability of your organization regarding climate change issues and the potential regulation in the future related to energy and so on. So the first things to do is really to start by identifying the current overall strategy of the organizations in order to present associated opportunities and also to identify the main criteria to carry out GHG emission reductions. For example, for preparing progressions in energy prices or maybe future taxes, reducing operating costs, improving your image. And if you really have to choose some criteria, and you will see different associations related to climate or environmental issues and your business model. So for that, carbon footprint in general, from calculations to implementation of actions or definition of a low carbon strategy, is a real mean to assess the way in which your organizations is working now. And you have to choose several criteria regarding financial investments, cost of financial functioning, financial savings too, easiness to implement some actions, the need to raise employees' awareness, but also to take into account external stakeholders like the benefit for image from customers' part or financial or investors' part, and future needs also from customers' parts. So that is also the criteria you need to take into account to fully include the low carbon strategy in the overall strategy of the organizations. In fact, you are talking about low carbon strategy because it is a specific part of the strategy with specific indicators really close to the carbon indicators. But in fact, it should be really included in the overall strategies. And for that, some new methodology are developed since 2015, maybe since the Paris Agreement. You have from Paris Agreement to SBTs, but also from Paris Agreement to ACT initiatives. So what is ACT initiatives? Once an organization has established its action plan and once its global strategy involves the GHG focusing elements, it's time to ensure the compatibility of this strategy with a low carbon society. So that is the objective of the ACT initiatives. It's really to ensure, to assess the compatibility of your current strategy with a low carbon society. So it's a method. This first method was used in order to determine an emission reduction objectives and the trajectory compatible with a 2-degree world. So you have the SBT in one hand, but also other sources of methodology like the International Energy Agency scenarios, which present also trajectory pathways for energy sectors. And built on the different scenarios and on sectoral emissions consistent with the IPCC recommendations, the ACT initiatives is an assessment methodology which aims to give to investors a comprehensive information about how a company is coherent with a 2-degree compatible pathway. But we will see that ACT initiative targets companies, investors, customers, so many kind of actors. So the ACT initiatives is a framework developed by ADEME, so the French Environmental Agency, and the CDP, following an iterative process that involves companies from relevant organizations, think tanks, NGOs, investors, policymakers. And the development process implies several consultation iterations between the methodology development team and the technical working group, constituted by the company representatives and sectoral experts, because we'll see that we have sectoral methodologies. So after each consultations, new version of the methodology are drafted by the development team and iterated through this process with discussion points, assumptions, decisions, and rationale for those decisions documented through the whole process. So ACT is about what ACT assessing so ACT means low assessing low carbon transition. Sorry, I have to give you the information since the beginning. So what is assessing low carbon transition is about? The ACT initiatives is like the cornerstone of an arc. It creates between all other elements, guaranteeing their stability for the intended purpose. First, a company measures what it's doing, then it reports it publicly, and it starts actively managing climate issues in terms of governance, incentives, GHG reduction initiatives, and short-term and long-term commitments, like a science-based target. So, ACT assesses if all that the company is doing is what it takes to achieve the low carbon transition or net zero emissions by 2050. The ACT initiatives provide the means to navigate and track progress of companies on the low carbon transitions, and it assesses whether or not the decisions they have made, are making, and will make are in line with the low carbon transitions. So it provides the credibility needed to back up corporate commitments on climate. Given that we have a short time to halve emissions, it's critical that consumers, but also investors, governments are aware of where companies from which they buy products, finance, tax, and regulates are in terms of transitioning. All can incorporate this knowledge to create incentives and tools for change. And for this reason, we see that it is a high potential toolbox for different users. The framework. So as I said, ACT is a framework. Why do we talk about a framework? We are assessing companies in different sectors and with different activities using a common structure, a common principles, what guides us in our decisions, a common indicator sets, and a common format. In this common structure or framework, that is then used to build a sector-specific methodology. In this way, they are highly consistent in how they are created, as well as in their applications and outputs regarding their sectoral specificities. That is why it's a framework. So the starting point of the ACT framework is the observations that the low carbon transition is a process that requires a will to act, and that there are ways to inquire into that willingness to act by corporate citizens. This first step is to define the generic questions we want to see answered by corporates. The second step is to translate the answers to which of those questions into a comprehensive set of indicators or criteria to evaluate the information gathered. And finally, in the third step, the aim is to arrange the set of indicators and criteria in such a way as to condense the information into a standardized rating, which can be used to communicate the final results. All the steps are mediated by a set of ACT principles that were established to guide us when we have decisions that imply difficult trade-offs. So now we can show the growth of emission during the 20th century and the first decade of 21st century, as well as the RCP 2.6, so the reference of the IPCC for the 2-degree scenario, which is in red. That's what we see is an economic system whose CO2 have an exponential growth dynamic. That is, growth leads to more growth. And the T-degree scenario represents a collapse of that system. But in this case, a voluntary collapse. In nature, the exponential growth dynamics always collapse when limits are reached. And because the planet is a finite system, there is always a limit. When we talk about low carbon transitions, we are talking of the need to collapse the high carbon economic system before we reach the planetary limit. That requires a will to act, and that the action is urgent. We need to peak emission as early as possible. So the collapse is also incredibly fast. Consider that the present dynamic has been gaining a momentum for more than a century now. And there are many structural components of our society and economy too that will require a reform. The collapse will also be messy and difficult to predict. How will be the company, the good company, and the latest company of the transitions? So with the Act, we have a mean to check the alignment with the low carbon transitions by assessing the credibility of companies' climate-related informations and commitments. And we use 5 questions to help us to do that. The first question is, what does the company propose to do? That is the commitment part. The second question is, what does the company plan to do it? That is the transition plan part. So this is a phase to implement the reductions actions designed. The third question is, what is the company doing now, if it's aligned with its future commitments or not? And the fourth question is, what has the company already done? So we also need to go in the past to see what is done now and what has already done, to see the consistent of the approach. And finally, the fifth question is, how does it all fit together to assure the consistency and relevance with all the commitments done by the company. So the first 4 questions express the dynamic vision of the company practicing the low carbon transitions or engaged in this pathway proposed by the Act, and the commitments to greenhouse gas reductions targets. And for the targets, Act evaluates the transitions plan that has been developed regarding the question 2, and how it is being delivered with the question 3. And it has been delivered in the recent past with the question 4. So finally, with Act, we have a mean to check if all the elements are consistently aligned and if the right governance, risks management, and business model too are changing, being considered the cap that the level of change required to go through a low carbon transitions. And next slide. So to answer each of the questions, ADEM and CDP have developed a set of standardized indicators models. They considers main areas of sustainability practice for any company and cover 9 models. The model 1 was the reduction targets, looks at the consistency of the company's announced commitments. The model 2 is the material investments, which allow to analyze the influence of the past, current, and future investment decisions on the low transition pathway based on its assets. And it mainly looks at the carbon locked-in effects of investing in high carbon assets. In the module 3, it's the intangible investments, which allow to look at companies' involvement in the emergency of technology or other practices contributing to low carbon economy. The module 4 regards performance of product sold, focused on the company's impact on its value chains as a whole. And the module 5 is the management, which is focused on the company's integrations of climate change into its development plans. For example, to manage an expertise in a specific domain or in the establishment of the transition plan. With the module 6, we watch the supplier engagements, focus on the company's engagements with the upstream part of the value chains. And with the model 7, we regard the customer engagement. That is the downstream part of the value chain. Module 8 is specific for policy engagements, which allow to analyze the company's support of public policy in the realm of the climate change mitigations. We have also some question about this part in the webinar too, regarding how a company or how a specific territory or geographical area are dynamic in the low carbon transitions pathway. This model is a specific indicator to assess this kind of aspects. And finally, in the module 9, which is specific for the business model, it's intended to ensure that the company has a strong, rakeable business model, allowing to go through a low carbon transition as an opportunity part regarding all the cross lines with the other aspect of the global organization's strategies. So time is running. I will go quickly through the final slide. So each model contains a set of indicators from 1 to 6 developed for specific sectors. And we have, for example, the target modules, which contains an indicator about the alignment of emission reduction targets with the 2-degree trajectory, or the material investments as an indicator of the R&D related to climate change mitigations. So the KPI can be applied or not to a sector depending on the relevance for these sectors, and also depending on the module attributed for the weight in the final score. Of course, the way to calculate the indicator and the weight you will ponder for each indicators will be specific for each methodology regarding the sectoral approach itself. So for now, the ACT methodology, I have seen that there is a lot of common structure provided by the framework, but also considerable amount of tailoring to each sector needs. So in applying the framework to develop sector methodology with the way to guide the decisions that have to be made by organizations. That is why we have defined the ADEM and CDP. So the Global Partnership Project has defined the ACT principles that are the relevance of the principle of selecting the most relevant information to assess the alignment with the low carbon transitions, the verifiability of the data, that are the assessments should be verified or verifiable, the conservativeness with the assumptions made to be sure that the error of the achieving is not in a different way with the 2-degree pathway, the consistency with a time series of data that should be comparable over time, and the long-term orientations that enable the evaluation of the long-term performance of the company while simultaneously providing insights into short, medium, and long-term outcomes in alignment with the long-term. And the final rating of the company will consist with 3 elements. The performance score, which is outcome of the company's answer regarding the 9 topics corresponding to the 9 models presented in the previous slide, and it's based on a numeric indicators. The narrative score provides by a summary of the company's assessment in terms of the complementarity criteria with the business model, more the qualitative criteria, the reputation, the maturity of climate integration, the strategic risks, the transparency, and this component is a major subjective because it's based on qualitative criteria, but at the same time, it's really important to make a balance in the final score. And the final trend score indicates the direction, is a minus, plus, or equal, to indicate the direction in which the company's score is expected to evolve in the ACT assessment. So it's 10. We have a little bit past the hour. So now I will give the floor to Katinka to go through the Mentimeter questions.
Yes, just one thing before we move on. Yes, just one thing before we move on, actually two. Rebecca has commented, if you just let me read that out before we move on. And in the meantime, if I could ask our participants to please switch on the cameras again, because we would like to do a screenshot once more towards the end of our session today. So I will just take a minute to read out Rebecca's comment. These two initiatives complement each other and are relevant at different stages in climate corporate action. By supporting companies in the process of setting science-based targets, the SBTI helps them define a clear sense of direction to be in line with the well below 2 Celsius or 1.5 Celsius decarbonization pathway. By supporting companies to achieve the low carbon transition and by monitoring their climate action, ACT helps them implement that direction and enhance the credibility of their climate commitments. Thank you, Rebecca. Comments, and thank you, Joaria, too, as well. So thank you if you switch on your camera so that we can do a screenshot again. We will wait a few more seconds and then we will move on to the Mentimeter questions.
And if you have any other questions or comments,
you are encouraged to leave your questions in the chat box, please, like you did last time.
You have a chance to ask Rebecca as well this time.
Okay, Sebastian has a question. Just feel free to add it in the chat box, please.
Even you can tell it personally, I suppose.
My son, but no more screen. We will just go on to the Mentimeter questions in a minute. I will just take a. Shall we take it now? Shall we wait for any more?
Yeah, I think we can just do that.
Yeah, we will do the green screen just
Big smile.
Yes, smile. Thank you. Okay, if Joaria, can you please let me share my screen to show you the Mentimeter questions?
Okay, you have the right.
Thank you. And
Sebastian had a question about tomorrow breakfast is organized.
Yes, it's for ABC part. We are organizing.
All right. Okay. So that's.
We are not invited, unfortunately, for the breakfast.
I'm so sorry about that.
You are invited if you can come to Paris. You are welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Let me just show you the questions. Yeah. So if you enter www.menti.com and the code is 8811938. Then you have the first question: has your company ever done carbon offsetting? And we already got one answer, so we can see that the system is already working. Yeah, last time we had to wait for the first answers to come in. But so far we only have no answers. We only have 6 questions for you today, and most of them are just simple like this, these multiple choice questions. So it will be just brief, but in the meantime, you can also think about your questions if you would like to add any. Okay.
And the potential answers are yes, we do it regularly, or yes, but not on a regular basis, or no.
Okay, so we already have one.
Made this carbon offsetting by your company.
One yes answer. Oh, okay, okay. Some more answers coming in. Some yes answers as well. Now, just one.
As we can see it in Hungary, quite a few companies are still interested in carbon offsetting, but it's already starting.
Okay, we will wait a few more seconds and then move on to the next question.
Yeah, we can see from the answers that it's not as common yet. Carbon offsetting.
All right. Shall we wait a few more seconds or move on?
We can go maybe. 14 answers. We encourage you to answer.
Yeah, www.menti.com and then 8811938. The code for you.
I put all the information in the chat box for the participant who would like to participate. Please go to Menti and enter the code now.
Thank you.
We can move on.
Okay, next question is, do you personally think carbon offsetting could be the answer to climate change? Yes, and I often plant trees for this reason, only partly or not at all. About the system, and most of the answers show that you partly think it's possible to mitigate climate change with this system.
Yeah, we also used to recommend to companies that the carbon offsetting not the first step. First step is the reduction as much as is possible, and then, which is not possible, then they can move on the carbon offsetting.
Can we move on? We've got 18 answers.
18
okay.
Answers. Thank
Next
you.
question, and we are halfway. Is your company planning to make significant carbon reduction? Yes, we are aiming at carbon neutrality. Yes, about 30 to 50%. Yeah, just ignore the 20% in the question. Just please choose from the answers. Yes, about up to 30% or no. So significant reduction in your carbon emissions for your company. All kinds of answers coming in. And even carbon neutrality is aimed at some cases.
Yeah, we didn't build in the deadline for which year, but in a short term.
Yeah, short term. Okay, shall we move on?
Yes.
Okay, next question. Has your company considered science-based target setting within the last 2 years? Yes or no? Just a very simple question. One yes, one no.
Yes, thank you for the answers. At least 4 yes, that's very good, I think.
Thank you. And also, if you have questions about the science-based target, Rebecca is still with us, and you can ask your questions in the chat box. Okay, thank you for your answers. I think we can move on. And the last two questions, basically just reflection on what the organizers prepared for you in during these 3 sessions. Have the webinar series met your expectations? Yes, partly or no?
Yes. And as we already mentioned before, after the previous webinars, we also plan to have a training for bill and carbon methodology and tool, online training in the same way. It should be somewhere in November. We will send you all the information as we fix the date.
Yes, or if you just follow the website of KÖVET and the ABC, then you will be able to find information on those services as well. Okay, thank you for your answers. And just the very last question, any suggestions? So what do you think? If there is any change for any upcoming events, also thinking about training that's going to happen.
We can't hear you very well, Katinka and Catalina. I don't know if you are far from your microphone.
Oh, sorry,
Yes, it's better.
I moved away from the micro. So any suggestions for the organizers for the upcoming event, if you have? This is the very last question. We can't see any answers yet. Does that mean there are no suggestions? Or? Oh, yes. Accent is difficult to understand. She speaks too fast. Maybe give
Sorry.
examples, introduce English subtitles. Okay. Examples.
More examples.
Okay, so more examples.
Like.
Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Show clear drawing to show SBTI, CDI, PU and goals, etc. are all interconnected in order to see where to start. Okay, we will consider these suggestions and thank you very much for them.
Thank you.
We will build them in our next or upcoming events. Study case of a company, the show. Yes, thank you. Yes, it's ours, so we are showing this.
We will send you all the Mentimeter results as well with the PPTs.
Okay, so can we give Joaria to the screen is back to you. Thank you very much for your answers.
Thanks.
Just the last couple of slides with the contact details upcoming. It's not specifically decided yet for the exact date, but we will come back to you with those and basically the sources that that are listed. But you will get all the material that was prepared for this presentation. We will see if there are any questions. Maybe share the PowerPoint.
Question.
Yeah. Yes, we will definitely send them to you. We still encourage you to ask your questions if there are any.
There's a question from Paulina on SVT. I'm happy to quickly answer.
Paulina Villes, yes. I think that for the company that have set targets aligned with well below 2 degrees with the SBT initiatives, will it be compulsory in the future to reset the targets with 1.5 degrees?
Great. Thanks for your question, Paulina. So currently the minimum ambition, as you've explained in your question, is well below 2 degrees. Although we do encourage companies to reach for the highest ambition of 1.5 degrees. As the climate science is continuously being updated, we may revisit the minimum ambition in the future, but not as of yet. I'll also post the written answer in the chat.
Sorry. So there is another question that came privately to us. What are the main challenges SBT face today to encourage companies to set goals and ambitions? Rebecca, can you please?
Sure. So our main obstacle that we've heard from companies is around scope 3, so around their value chain emissions and gathering data and getting buy-in and uptake for target setting on that. We have released more information and resources on that, and we are investigating and exploring more specific guidance for scope 3 to offer additional support as a longer term project for the SBTI, but it's mainly around data and scope 3 that companies have found quite tricky.
Thank you. And there is another question from Julie. What is the
Yes.
main difference between bilan carbon and GHG protocol?
With the GHG protocol, you have your results regarding a split between the indirect, or upstream, downstream emissions. So you have to characterize your sources of emissions, and in the bilan carbon, you don't have to characterize your sources. You just have to enter all your data without taking into account if it's upstream, downstream, direct, indirect, because the aim is really to have a carbon footprint. The bilan carbon is absolutely not designed to make firstly a reporting. It's really to have a carbon footprint, but with the different standards and with the development of the French law, and to include also the GHG protocol, you have the possibility to have an extraction of your results compatible with the GHG protocol, the ISO standards, and so on. But the main idea of the bilan carbon is not to take into account if your sources of emission is direct, indirect, on-site, or outside, upstream, downstream. This is the main difference.
Okay, thank you. And there is one more question that came privately to us. Are short-term profitability goals an obstacle to low-carbon strategies? Don't know who would like to answer that question. Joaria, too, please.
Sorry, I'm looking for the question, and I
It
don't
came
understand.
privately to us. You won't be able to see it just now. Are short-term profitability goals an obstacle to low-carbon strategies? It was sent to us in private. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I have a short answer for that. We think that companies shouldn't think only in short terms and shouldn't think only in short-term profitability. So the low carbon strategies are according to midterm strategies at companies. We hope, at least, and we think. What are your experiences, Barito?
I sent it to the common flow, so you can see it now, maybe.
The short-term actions or strategy is a starting point, in fact. So we can't say that it's not profitable because we have some part of the action, short-term actions like raising awareness of your employees, including the top management, and including maybe internal stakeholders, which will be in the future of high importance to have these actors in the definition of your midterm strategy and long-term strategy. So it's not an obstacle, but you should keep in mind that it's really a starting point and that you should go through the midterm and at least at the final point through the long-term strategies.
Yeah, and also I think there are some kind of low-hanging fruits in energy efficiency, which can be really a kind of savings also for the companies. So the first steps, as far as we practice at the companies, the first steps on energy efficiency and these things could be a saving also for the company. And after all, when these low-hanging fruits are already over, that will be the bigger investments should come later on.
Yes, because with short term, the investment is really low. Maybe sometimes you don't really need to have a big investments to implement this kind of actions. And it's also a mean to see that taking into account the climate change issues for your organization's work is of high importance because you can have the first savings economies, and you can have a quick impact. So it's also a good point to go further, a big impact and a really refund of your business model. And for the company who are communicate about the environmental impact because of the law or the CSR reporting, in other aspects, you see that in the ACT methodology, we are also taking into account the previous actions implemented in the past. So if you see that we have never implemented any actions and that you have a huge commitment regarding the low carbon transitions, maybe you will have a very low rate or a very low note about the indicators or about the trend. But if you see that an organization have already implemented, even if it's quick, short-term actions, it will be more consistent with its commitments for the future and what it has done currently. So it's of high importance regarding the ACT methodology, for example, because we are taking into account also what have done in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's also better than nothing.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being with us.
I think that's all
For this
about the
webinar.
question.
There are no
For your participation.
Thank you for
Thank you,
Rebecca and
Jordan,
Joarito too.
and Rebecca for your presentation.
And
We will send
yes,
out the
we will send
presentation.
to all participants a recap email with the support of the three sessions and also the link to the replay. So if you would like to see the webinar later. So thank you so much and
Thank you
have
very
a
much.
nice day.
Have a good day. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.